So everyone, I want to introduce Richard Miranda. He is a native of San Juan, Puerto Rico, and a 40-year resident of Houston, Texas. He's been a realtor since 2002. Richard holds his broker's associate position with Keller Williams Platinum and is the managing director for their commercial division at that office. He is a past chairman for both the Houston Association of Realtors and Texas Association of Realtors International Advisory Committees. Currently, Richard serves as the director for Houston Association of Realtors, Texas Association of Realtors, and the National Association of Realtors. And he is a regional vice president for Texas Realtors Association. And he's presently the 2020 chair-elect for HAR, or HAR. He is a member of the Mexican Real Estate Association, or AMPI. And he is also a Texas MCE certified instructor, a certified CIPS instructor, ABoR instructor, an at-home with diversity instructor, and he is our NAR's Global Ambassador to Mexico. So help me welcome, oh, and he was the 2016 NAR CIPS Instructor of the Year. So please help me welcome Richard Miranda.
Thank you. Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your markets and who you're representing, and let's go from there.
I'll start. And I was in my previous life, which was before I became a real estate licensed agent in 2002. I had been in the telecom industry, and for a long time before that, I was a traveling sales rep, and my territory was Latin America. So when in 2001, 2002, the telecom bubble burst, and all these telecom companies started going bankrupt and getting absorbed, and mine went out of business, and I ended up unemployed. And then that's when I got my real estate license. Nevertheless, though, because I had so many relationships, specifically a lot of people in Mexico, which is it was my largest market. And I just kept those contacts alive. And believe it or not, I ended up going to a trade show in Mexico City 6 months after I got my real estate license. And I started connecting with the people in the real estate industry down there. I met the president of AMPI at that trip, and I met a whole bunch of other people. And that's what started my connection with Mexico. I already had one in my previous industry, but the one on the real estate side was just totally new. And it's just been a wonderful trip ever since. And I go to all these activities at AMPI, which is the Mexican Real Estate Association. They have, and that has the fact that I got to meet a lot of real estate practitioners down there, and the fact that I went to many forums and I gave talks and I gave training sessions, et cetera, it has generated business for me, because I don't ask for it, because we're not supposed to, right? When you're representing NAR, you do not promote yourself, period. However, people know, so they contact me later and they ask me if I want to handle a buyer for them here in Houston. And of course, I'm not going to say no. So I have gotten business from my referrals, from my relationships that I developed through the last 18 years. So the bulk of my business is inbound foreign buyers. And I still have a good chunk of my other part of my business is local listings, with local buyers and sellers. But it has generated a lot of business for me, the relationship that I developed with my AMPI guys. So if you want to get involved in that, and my suggestion, if you want to get involved and start developing these relationships with other countries and other real estate agents that live in other countries, I'll tell you what the best way, what best worked for me was going to some of the local trade shows, real estate trade shows in the country that I chose, and start meeting people in those trade shows. And it works. And that's me. I'm up my soapbox.
So you're involved with obviously residential and mentioned commercial as well.
Yes.
So how are you're going to in-country, so you're doing a lot with AMPI, I know, in the Mexican market. What are you seeing in some of the other markets that you're representing, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua?
Not much. As Nicaragua is undergoing a lot of crisis internally. The government is not very pro private property or private industry, even though they have passed laws guaranteeing property rights and stuff like that. But the real estate industry is very, very immature in places like Nicaragua because they just don't have a solid track of transactions and private property rights and things like that. Honduras is a very poor country, and the only part of Honduras that's actually doing any kind of significant real estate business is the Bay Islands, which is Roatan and a couple of other smidgers of little islands over there. So Roatan is extremely well. They have an association which mirrors the way that the associations in the U.S. are run, to the point that they even have an MLS that they created, and it is almost like the exact rules and regulations of MLS as your stateside. So they're doing very well. El Salvador is very small. They don't have a very large, but they have a small association which is very vocal. The other one is Guatemala, which I know very little of it because there just has not been an opportunity to go and see them and meet with them in person.
So at a national level, do we have bilateral agreements with each of these countries in place?
We have a bilateral agreement with Mexico, of course. We have one with El Salvador. We don't have one with Nicaragua. And we don't have one with Honduras. There is one with the Bay Islands, but not with Honduras mainland. And in Guatemala, we don't have one yet. So.
And are those organizations or MLSs working on licensing? Do they have those in place? And what kind of CIPS? I mean, are there a number of CIPS people in the country?
The largest amount of CIPS is outside of the U.S. and Canada, is in Jamaica, actually. And then the second largest number is in Mexico. Mexico has about 60, 65 CIPSs. And there are going to be more because we're doing a class in Playa del Carmen. No, I'm sorry. We're doing a virtual CIPS course for the Cabo San Lucas AMPI members. And so we expect many of them. We'll probably expect around 60 people to join the class, and of which probably maybe half of them will get their designations after that. And then after that, most of the other ones don't have any presence in the CIPS programs or anything. So yeah.
Okay. And are they doing licensing there? And
no, yes and no. The only country that is actually doing licensing is Mexico. Mexico is not doing a what we call a nationwide licensing effort. They're doing it individually by states. There's about 19 states in Mexico that have some sort of a registration law. And then after the registration law comes the licensing law. So it's a two-step process, which is very difficult to obtain because a lot of the Mexican labor unions are screaming that belonging to an association is going to restrict the right of work. And Mexico has in their constitution, written in their constitution, that everybody has a right to work whatever the heck they want to. So the labor unions are very, very powerful in Mexico. And whenever they see a little bit of a threat, they start screaming bloody murder. So most of the state legislatures have been able to get around that by stressing that if you want to be a practitioner, you want to practice real estate, you can still do it. You don't have to be a member of AMPI. You don't have to be a member of any association, which is kind of like what we have also here in the U.S. You know, we may have, NAR has what, 1.3 million paying members, but there's another $300,000-400,000 practitioners out there that are not members of NAR. And they're not required to be members of NAR as long as they comply with their licensing laws. And it's the same thing that we're going to eventually start letting the Mexican population and the Mexican labor unions realize that you don't have to be a member of AMPI to be able to practice real estate and get a license. Mm-hmm. But AMPI is pushing the licensing issue because they want to elevate, you know, the level of professionalism. And they've been trying to do that for the last 50 years. It's a tough uphill battle. But I think now with 19 states that have passed the registration laws, and after that they pass another law called the licensing laws. Now they have to have a little card that says, I am a licensed real estate agent and this is my license, blah, 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 blah. And that gives them the ability to be able to post their licenses numbers in ads and newspaper ads and television ads and the business cards, whatever. And it adds a little bit higher level of professionalism than somebody who claims to be an agent and drives around an Uber or works behind a bar, because they still do that. Oh yeah, I can sell your house. So, but that happens in many other countries, by the way. It's not just in Mexico.
Yeah.
A lot of countries in Europe that do not have licensing requirements.
Yeah. What are the home ownership rates? I guess we can start with any of the countries, but specifically Mexico.
I think in Mexico is running higher than we are. It's probably in the high 60s. Ours is the very low 60%. And that's obviously because what happened in 2008, the top of 2009. But Mexicans, when they buy a house, they usually stay there. And they don't buy a house in a subdivision like we do. They buy a tract of land, and then they start building the property section by section, little by little. And they typically don't have to rely on a mortgage because they start building the property and building the house with the cash available. It is beginning now to go into a different aspect. The mortgage industry in Mexico is beginning to grow and develop and mature, but the interest rates are very high. If you want to get a mortgage, you can only do it for like 15 years, and your interest rates are very high, like around 9%. So,
what does that do for the building codes, zoning codes? Are there any in place?
oh yeah. If you go to the tourist cities like Playa, Cabo, they have very strict construction codes. But most of the people that are selling buildings and condos are the builders themselves. A builder will hire 3 or 4 people, and then they will put them in the front desk there in a seat and show them how to sell the property.
Mm-hmm.
And they will do a lot of pre-construction sales, and then of course, let's say that you want to buy a $300,000 condo within a walking distance from the beach. You go ahead and make your, put your offer in and put your bid in. They'll take your money, and then as the property keeps getting built, which may take anywhere from 6 months to a year, depending on the scope and the size of the development, you keep sending money to these guys until you pay off the mortgage, or not the mortgage, until you pay off the debt for the property. And then when it's finished, they give you the keys, and then you get the deed to the property.
Okay.
Well, there's a whole bunch of other paperwork involved too. If you're not a Mexican resident or a Mexican national, you can buy properties in Mexico, by the way. There's been a fallacy about foreigners cannot buy properties in Mexico. That was true up until 1992.
Oh, good. That was my next question. We have a client and we want to, purchase, a U.S. citizen wants to purchase property. So let's talk about that.
You can purchase properties anywhere in Mexico. There's really no restrictions. There are 2, what they call the restricted zone is 35 miles from the coast and 50 miles from the borders, international borders, which means that if you are not a Mexican national, you may be able to buy that property under certain restrictions. You have to go and sign up and create what is called a trust. In Spanish, it's called fideicomiso. And that is what gives you the right of ownership of the property, because what you do is you buy the property, but you do not hold the deed in your hand. The deed is being held similar to a trustee here in the US if you have a mortgage, except that trustee is a bank, and that bank is going to hold that deed to your property in a vault, and you pay for that, $400 a year or something like that, and it takes about $2,500 to set up the trust. But anybody who is a foreigner, no matter what country, if they want to buy a property on the coast or near the border, they have to go through a trust. If you buy a property not in the restricted area, for example, Guadalajara, Cuernavaca, Mexico City, San Miguel Allende, you do not need a trust. You can buy it fee simple, just like you own it here. That's
So
it.
I want to make sure everybody knows to jump in with questions. If you have
Is
questions,
that-
I have a lot of them, but
Is
Matthias?
there a risk? Is there a risk behind that? The trust is some kind of a Mexican institution or something like that, and I'm, as a foreigner,
The people who hold it's a bank. It's a national bank in Mexico that holds the deed to your property.
So what does it mean? What does it mean in terms of ownership? So let's say something changes politically or whatever.
Well, the governments in Mexico change every 6 years, and this law has been around since 1992. And there has never been incidents of people losing their properties because the government decided to expropriate the land or something like that.
All right.
And Mexico has a very strong private property laws, and they will stick to it.
All right.
If you may have heard 20, 30 years ago, maybe even 40 years ago, there had been an incident in the Pacific side of Mexico near Ensenada where some people allegedly lost their properties, and the Mexican police and the Mexican army had to come here and kick them out. Well, what happened was that a whole bunch of North Americans, started buying properties from an unreliable and shady developer who had actually started selling land that belonged to a ejido, which is an agricultural co-op. And this guy was fraudulently selling tracts of land with fake titles. Well, people didn't bother checking. And they went ahead and bought, you know what they say about caveat emptor, right? Buyer beware. These people took no care. They just went ahead and bought them and trusted this guy. They started building houses. The real owners of the property, which were a Mexican agricultural co-op, sued the developer and sued the homeowners to get them out because that was not their property. Well, it was a long, protracted legal battle, but the original owners, who were the farmers, won the case. They had to force these owners out of their properties. When many of them didn't want to get out, they had to call the cops. And when the cops weren't able to help them, they had to call the army. And that's how that that incident was blown out of proportion. And it created the impression that Mexican government would expropriate your house. So don't buy a house in Mexico because the government will take it away from you. That's what really happened. And then after that, there's never been any kind of issues or problems or incidents like that. And that was, 30 some years ago. So you buy a property in Mexico, and even though you don't hold the deed in your hand, if you have a mortgage right now, I have a mortgage on my house. I don't have the deed. I have a copy of the deed. The original is held by the trustee just to make sure I make my payments. Similar thing. And you can actually do whatever you want with that property because you have all the rights of ownership. You can transfer it, you can sell it, you can lease it, you can will it. You can do whatever you want with it. So there's no restrictions. If you decide to sell it to another foreigner, you both of you will have to go through the what we call the fideicomiso, the trust, just like you would with another foreign buyer. But it's not a complicated process. It just requires a lot of steps and a lot of paperwork. So my suggestion is, if you're looking to buy a property, say in Cabo, and or some other resort in Mexico, the best thing to do would be to find a trustworthy real estate agent, which may or may not have a license, but they know what they're doing. The fact that some of these practitioners do not have a license does not mean that they're not professionals. And I'll tell you this, I have the utmost respect for the overwhelming majority of AMPI members, because they have managed to be able to to professionalize the industry without the support or the protection of the laws that we have. We have title insurance. We have title companies that protect that we get paid. We have a whole bunch of laws to protect other things, to protect our commissions. But in Mexico, it's the law of the Old West in many cases when it comes to deal with a seller and a buyer and commission payments. So these guys I take my hat off to them because they're professionals and they know what they're doing, even though some of them do not have a license.
Capital gain, if you do that, if you buy a property in Mexico, let's say you hold it for, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and you sell it and you get capital gain, do you have to pay tax in Mexico for that, or how is that working?
Yes. You pay taxes in Mexico first because that's where the property is located. However, fortunately, Mexico and the US have a tax treaty. So anything that you pay to the Mexican government as capital gains, you can deduct on your IRS forms. So you don't get taxed double because of the tax treaty between Mexico and US. And the US has tax treaties with about 84 other countries. So no matter where you buy the property, you are subject to pay capital gains to the taxing authorities in that location. But fortunately, the IRS is not going to double tax you because all you have to do is show them that you paid your local taxes to the local government. So they deduct that from what you have to pay them, the IRS.
So let's talk a little bit about average or median home prices. Maybe give us a range around, I know that they're going to change from being urban to rural to probably coastal front vacation type homes. What are you seeing in the Mexican market? And then we can look at maybe some of the other countries as well.
It's always based on location. You could buy a gorgeous house in San Miguel Allende with a courtyard, 3 bedrooms, a rooftop. It'll probably run you about $350,000 or maybe less depending on the condition. You could buy a house that is just about to crumble apart and you could probably buy it for a song and then refurbish it and then turn around and flip it and sell it for beaucoup of money. So it's very similar like what we do here. The challenge is that you want to make sure that the property is solid and that you are going to be making a good investment. If you buy a property close to the beach, let's say Cabo, or let's say San Miguel, Playa, and Ed is familiar because he lived in that Playa many years. So I'd say I want to buy a condo on close to the beach. Depending on how close to the beach I want, I pay. I can go to on the other side. There's a Carretera Federal that runs parallel to the coast. And if you're between the Carretera Federal and the beach, that's where the prices are higher. If you're on the other side of the Carretera Federal towards the jungle, then your prices are much cheaper. But you have to walk a lot farther to get to the beach. But there's a lot of smaller communities that have developers are building small complexes of 10, 15 units, and they're selling them for $175,000, $200 to $225,000. You can still buy properties for under $250,000, which are within walking distance from the beach. But let me tell you, they're not going to be very large. They tend to be a little bit smaller than the average condo that you would see here in the US. But it gives you the ability to own one and then, be close to the beach. There's a lot of people in Mexico that are doing that, and then guess what they're doing? They're putting it on Airbnb. I rented an Airbnb once in like that, so it works. I mean,
So
even local Mexican guys are doing it, by the way, not just the tourists. Tourists are buying and putting it on Airbnb, and so is Mexican local buyers.
So pre-COVID-19, how is that market looking, and are there licensing laws around the Airbnb? I know some neighborhoods have pushback here in the US. What does that look like there?
The market was exploding before COVID. I mean, most of the units that a small developer would build, say a small complex of 10, 15 units, he would sell them within months. But right now, it's a different story.
Mm-hmm.
They sell quickly.
Christine, I was going to say, I spoke with our offices in Mexico last week and in Cabo, specifically, he said that their prices are down about 20% right now.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're going to see that here too.
And Ed, you have exposure to down there. Any thoughts on that? I got to unmute you.
Yeah, as far as, Airbnb, obviously that's kind of dead in the water. Pre-COVID, the occupancy rate in Playa was like 87%. So that's crazy to be able to, purchase a property and then put it on Airbnb / have a developer such as Simca, run your management program. But right now everything's shut down. The good thing for a buyer right now in Mexico is the strength of the dollar. Right now, what you can buy right now is 30% cheaper than what you could have bought 3 months ago, probably. So it's a good time to purchase, I feel.
Good
And
thoughts.
the fact that the Mexican peso has been dropping in value, it's affecting also the inbound Mexican buyers. I was working with a couple in January, and they were ready to buy a house in the $500,000 price range. And then when this thing exploded, they just said, wait a minute, I can't buy anything right now, even if I wanted to, because the peso dropped from 19 to 25. It's almost 25, 28% of the value.
Yeah.
That's pretty scary. I mean, when you all of a sudden you have a dollar that's worth 75 cents, that's pretty bad. And so it does make the dollar appear more, the dollar is stronger, but one has to be careful too, because a lot of the prices and properties in the tourist resorts and the tourist areas in Mexico are sold in dollars, not pesos. Excuse me. So they're sold in dollars, so they don't care. Just if it was selling for $250 prior to COVID, they may have dropped the prices now because everybody wants to just turn over their inventory, but many of these properties are still being sold under dollars instead of pesos.
So let's talk a little bit about who's involved in the process. I don't know where our feedback's coming from. Let's talk a little bit about who's involved in the process, buyer, seller, you're talking about no title companies, attorneys, inspections, banks or mortgages. Talk to a traditional or what we would normally see if you're investing or buying property down there.
Okay, so let's say I want to buy a condo in Playa. I hook up with a real estate agent. I look at several properties. I decide I'm going to buy this one. So we write, the agent writes up un contrato de compraventa, a purchase contract, and then we give the owner a deposit. Caveat, there is beginning now, most of the people that are buying properties in resort areas are not going and putting their deposit into the owner or the real estate agent anymore. They are using escrow companies. There are several escrow companies in Playa that will hold your money until the transaction is completed. What happens is that it gives you a security blanket, or it gives you a security, gives you a little bit of safety. In the event that the deal falls apart, you can get your money back. But so then you have you sign the contract. You do your due diligence. You get your money. There is no inspections in Mexico. You could hire an engineer to take a look at the property, but they don't have this concept of a mechanical engineer like we have here in the U.S. They don't have this concept of option period like we have here. So when you buy a property, you might want to go ahead and get an inspector, not an inspector, but an engineer to take a look at the property. So and see if there's no, major hidden defects or anything like that. So then you go ahead and you round up the money and you prepare the contract. The attorney who is going to handle the transaction is called a notario, not a notary like we know them here. I am a notary. The only thing I can do is attest for signatures. In Mexico, a notary is a specialized real estate attorney named or appointed by the governor of the state. So that's the title company. The title company is one attorney that will do all the title searches, make sure that there's no liens on the property, and like there's no other hidden defects or anything like that either, sorry, but any other hidden liens or defects in the title. And they also do the chain of ownership, just like they do here. The only thing is that since they don't have this concept of title insurance, you may want to go ahead and buy it anyway. It is available. There are title insurance companies in Mexico, but it's not like we do here where you typically, when you write a listing agreement, the seller is the one that ends up paying the title insurance on behalf of the buyer. That does not exist in Mexico. So the buyer usually buys the title insurance depending on the coverage that he wants. So everybody signs all the contracts, all the paperwork. They go to the attorney's office. They exchange money. They exchange funds. They sign signatures. They get the signatures and everything. And then if you are a foreigner, there's another process, which is the preparation of the trust fund and the fideicomiso. And that is prepared by another attorney. You work that out with another attorney. And then once you have all those documents, you take them to the notario, because the notario has to make a note that you're bringing money into the table and that some of it has to go to pay the fideicomiso. Another part of that money has to pay the bank that is going to hold your deed. So everybody, that's the attorney that does the transaction. The notario is the one that disperses the money, just like a title company does here. Except in that case, it's just a one-man shop. Or it could be a group of 5 or 6 attorneys that are running a what they call, it's not a title company, it's a notaria. And they're the ones that do all the paperwork. So yeah, it is perfectly legal and it's safe. You buy a property in Mexico and the government is not gonna come and take it away. The only way you can lose the property is if, kind of like here in the US, if you don't pay the taxes. And here's the other thing. The taxes, the property taxes in Mexico are very, very low. What you would pay here in 1 month for a house here in Texas, you pay that in 1 year in Mexico.
Wow. So where is the majority of foreign investment in real estate coming from? And again, we can talk about any of the countries, but it seems like we're focusing on Mexico. Where is that money coming from, and who is enjoying coming to Mexico?
Are you talking about people buying here in the U.S. or buying over there?
No, buying into Mexico, and yes, or we could do it reverse, where Mexican
they're coming
nationals
from everywhere. They're coming from everywhere. I was working with a developer in Huatulco, which is on the far southwest coast of the Pacific, near as almost as close as Guatemala as you could get. And it was a project that had 65 beautiful 3 and 4 bedroom condos overlooking the ocean. And half of those were purchased by Canadians. A third of them were purchased by Mexican expats who came back to Mexico. And then the other fourth was purchased by people from California, Seattle. Most people on the west coast of the US will focus on the west coast of Mexico. Most people that live on the east side of the US, like we do, Florida, Texas, and everything north and east of that, they end up going to the east side of Mexico. They go to the playa, they go to Cancun, they go to Tulum. And that's just because of geographies. But the most of them are coming from, there's also a lot of Europeans. If you walk the streets in Playa del Carmen at any given time, you will hear several different accents in Spanish. Venezuelans, Argentinians, Mexicans, and Spanians. And there's a lot of French, Dutch, Germans also in Playa. So Playa is probably one of the most attractive places for the whole world to purchase properties, because it is what it is. Playa is Playa. Cancun, Playa, and Tulum is just like one continuous strip of nothing but beautiful beaches and nice people.
Very good.
That's where most anybody that buys properties in Mexico are coming from all over the world, not just the U.S.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Anybody else have any questions? I was going to maybe take us into the economies and what is really driving the different economies. What are industries that are propelling that?
Mexico is driven by tourism. It used to be, back in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, that the largest single source of income in Mexico was the remesas, which is the money that Mexicans laborers would send back to their families. That was the biggest inflow of Mexican money. Not anymore. The remesas have fallen to a second or third place, or even fourth place. But the primary source of Mexican money is tourism. The second one is petroleum. Of course, petroleum is what it is right now. And the third one was manufacturing. There are huge plants, GM plants, Ford plants, Chrysler plants, all over Mexico. And they're employing, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Mexican laborers building cars that they send back to the US for sale. So that's the third one. Most of the Mexican economy is worked on those three things: tourism, petroleum, and manufacturing.
And several of them are taking some hits around the world right now, so that's a little challenging.
Yeah.
And what are the trends going on in the countries? What real estate market trends are you starting to see? I know we've got COVID kind of in the mix of that question, but where did you see things going before this? And then kind of what's your crystal ball look like of where you think the real estate markets will go in the future?
Mexico has a shortage of housing. They've always had a shortage of housing because there's not a mortgage industry, and many people were not able to afford even a small tract of land to be able to buy it later. But the trend is that as the population keeps growing, the developers are realizing that, we have to start building low-income housing. So you're going to see a big trend of low to not so, lower middle class to lower income type of properties. And that's one of the trends you're going to see. Hopefully, I don't know where it's going to go with COVID, but that was one of the trends that we were beginning to see. With the current president, who's kind of like a populist, he was pushing that initiative about affordable housing, because, like I said, Mexico has a real serious housing shortage. Not for the tourists, because if you're a tourist, you want to find a property on the beach, you'll find one. I'm talking about the Mexican laborer who's earning, small amount of money, but who wants to have a house for his wife and kids. And those are the ones that are suffering because they can't afford it.
Yeah. Are there any other thoughts or questions I haven't hit around either the Mexican market, Nicaragua, El Salvador, that you'd like to share with us?
Nicaragua has, like I said, a very unfriendly government towards foreign investment. And it's been like that since this fellow got elected president several years ago, Daniel Ortega. He's not a friend of any kind of foreign investment. And so the Nicaraguans are kind of pretty much at a standstill. And the Honduran islands are doing very well because there's a lot of influx of tourists, or at least up to COVID. In Guatemala, there's not much going on. Guatemala does not have a lot of tourist attractions other than some cities in the Antigua, or maybe a couple. The beaches in Guatemala are not pretty. And so it's not like they don't draw people to the beaches like Mexico does. And same thing in El Salvador. They have a coastline, and Nicaragua also. They have a coastline facing the Pacific, but the beaches are not like Cancun. They're not like the beaches that you see in Vallarta or other places in Mexico that are just absolutely gorgeous. So. And in Honduras, it's a very poor country. They don't have any beaches at all, except in the Bay Islands. But the Bay Islands are out of reach for most of the Honduran natives. They're not even thinking about buying properties on the resort islands where most tourists are hanging out. So it's pretty much a status quo, and things are not moving very fast anywhere in those four countries.
So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. We have a number of members that are interested in following in your footsteps and playing at a very high level at the national level. Some have been involved at the state level. What are some of your recommendations to get involved, whether it be the CIPS council or committees at NAR or the Global Business Alliance, becoming or applying for the global ambassador role that you're in now? can you give some guidance around that?
Sure. NAR has this what used to be a PL program, and they would send out invitations to all the CIPSs that they had on the roster, asking them if they wanted to become a global ambassador, excuse me, back then a presidential liaison in any particular city. So NAR sends out these invitations, they send out the calls, and we even have to refill or reapply every year to the positions that we have and explain why, and then show them, you know, we have a track record of, well, I've done this, I've done that, but they still want to see it. So that is very doable, because if you're a member of NAR, you should be getting those emails or the call to join one of those committees. At local level, TAR, before I even became involved, I used to go to the TAR meetings and just show up into the international global group. I just show up. I mean, it's an open committee. If you're not a member, you don't get to vote, but you can sit in and listen. And that's how I did it. I started showing up for the meetings and introducing myself, and we met twice a year during in February in Austin, and then the second time would be in September at whatever city the TAR meetings were being held. So showing up to these meetings and these committees is important. So that's how I got started. So if you want to start getting involved in some of these events or committees, show up to these events and the meetings that they hold in the association meeting rooms and stuff like that. And not just for TAR, but also NAR. I did the same thing. I started showing up at the meetings, and you know, first time I walked in there, I had no idea. I didn't know anybody, so I'm here. So I started meeting people, and next thing you know, you go after, if you do this enough times, like at the third or the fourth or the fifth time they see you, they kind of like assume you're in the group. So that's when you start then applying for positions in the committees, and it makes it a lot easier for you if you start getting involved at the personal level. You got to show up. You have to be going to the meetings, and even though you may not know anybody, just once you go in there the first or second time, people start knowing you. Go to the activities, go to the cocktails, go to the networking sessions. And what worked for me was the fact that right after I got my CIPS in 2003, I got my license in July of 2002. And HAR was having this course called the Certified International Property Specialist that I had no idea what it was. So I called the lady who runs the training department at HAR back then, and her name was Virginia Parras. And Virginia told me that, oh, you need to sign up because this is the only time they were going to have all 6 days. It was 6 days back then. We're going to have all these 6 days in the city of Houston, because typically they would do one module here, another module in San Antonio, another module in Chicago, and then it would take you forever to get your CIPS designation because you have to go to 5 different cities and spend 5 different budgets. But this time they decided to do it all at once in one particular city. So I did it. I got certified, and pretty quickly after that, I went back to my sources. I had relationships with people in Mexico. So I had one of my friends that I kept in touch with, and I asked him, hey, by the way, is there a trade show going on in Mexico, a trade show for real estate? So he said, yeah, I got one right here. Excuse me. I got one right here. So sends me the link. I signed up, paid $300 for the airfare, a couple of $100 for 3 nights of hotel, and the entrance was like $15. And that's what got me started. That was that first trade show that I told you that I went to, that I met the president of AMPI. By coincidence, we literally bumped into each other. And that's what started me in my Mexico involvement. It was kind of like a natural for me because I already had knowledge of the city, knowledge of the country, but I had everything that I knew about Mexico had to do with the telecom industry, not the real estate. So it was a learning curve for me also. But the fact that I was there and going to the conventions and going to the forums and going to the AMPI activities, it helped open a ton of doors. So
Richard, I know that
that's a way to do it.
Our members can actually join AMPI. Talk a little bit about that, please.
AMPI has a registration for the international section. It's $50 a year. And I think they had a special going on at the beginning of the year for $35 or so. But if you guys are interested, send me an email and I will contact Ana. Ana Aguilar is the international coordinator in Mexico City. I will ask her to send me an updated AMPI International membership application, because I don't know if they're still honoring the $35 or if they went back up to the $50. But nevertheless, the membership gives you access to the AMPI website, and they'll give you a little pin that you can put in. It's kind of like a green pin that says AMPI, and
Yeah,
you get
that'd be fantastic.
Where's mine? You get a certificate like I can't reach it. It's hanging up on my wall. I was gonna take it down and show it to you, but I need a step stool. So they'll send you a certificate in the mail, and every year I renew my license, my membership, and every year they send me a new certificate. But I like it. I'm very proud of it.
That's great.
It
Jill, jump in here.
and
Yeah.
it opens doors for you.
Well, so what is the benefit of someone like me in Austin joining AMPI? Because like I've been in Korea, I've been in FIOPSI. You know, what would AMPI do for me?
Good question. I didn't realize that I could have a source of referrals by developing relationships with AMPI practitioners, but I did. It happened. You start developing relationships with a lot of other real estate agents in a particular city. The moment that they the moment that they say that they have a client and they'll think of you, they'll send it to you. And they've done it with me. So yes, you will get business from your associates or your relationships in AMPI in Mexico.
Ed,
And
jump in there.
I'll agree with that. I've been a member of AMPI because I followed Richard into AMPI and going to the AMPI conventions and this year hosting the Texas Realtor Cruise for the third year with AMPI. Man, it's developed some good contacts, and man, so many people from Mexico are moving to Texas. So you're going to make those connections. They want to deal with somebody that they know, somebody that they've seen at their conventions. And, you know, when you're a part of their deal, we often see a bunch of them, not only at the TR conventions, but man, they're at the NAR conventions in full force. So, you know, it's just building those connections. And for $50, man, it's a good deal for you.
Mara, you had a question? You want to
Yeah.
unmute there?
Hey, Richard, I met with the AMPI coordinator at NAR in San Francisco back in November, and I signed up, but I never heard back from them. Do you know who I should contact?
Who was it? Was it Ana Aguilar?
I believe so.
Do you have her contact info?
I don't.
Send me an email and I will send it back to you.
Okay, great.
And
Thank
Richard,
you.
if you want to respond to my email with her contact, I'll just shoot it out to all
Okay,
the group here.
perfect.
Make
I'll
it
send
Yeah,
easy.
that'd be
Her
great.
phone number and her email. Yeah.
That'd be
I will do
perfect.
that. Yeah.
Yay. Any other questions,
yeah.
guys?
What's that?
Any other questions? We
I did have a
good?
comment. I'm trying to remember what it was.
Hey, one thing I'd like to mention is Richard is teaching a CIPS virtually at HAR. What is it, June 18th through the 24th, maybe?
Yes. Let me tell you
And we're-
exactly. Yes. Thanks for bringing it up, Ed.
And
The
we are offering it, I think, at $4.99, which is a big discount.
Yeah.
To do it virtually.
Typically, the
I got him his medicine.
It's that actually this course is around $750. It's a 5-day course. It's not a single day. It's 5 days, but it's money. This is an effort. This is money well spent. I definitely recommend it. This is probably, to me, other than the GRI, which I do not have, other than the GRI, which I respect, and I eventually may end up getting it. It's probably the second best designation that NAR has, the CIPS. And it is on the 18th and 19th of January. And then
July?
we're going to split it in the weeks. And then on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of the following week, which is the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th, there'll be the last 3 modules.
That'd be June, you mean?
That
You
would
said
be
January.
June, not January. It's June.
June.
Okay,
Did I say January?
it's all right.
June.
And our global week here at ABoR is June 15th through the 18th. We have a 9 to 10 o'clock program on that morning to wrap up our global week during that time. And then we are going to have a CIPS course with Tricia Roy at September 27 through October 1st. We hope that will be in person, but we are looking at alternatives that may be online as well. So just know that you've got some upcoming options.
Yeah, the course is 5 days, and every module is different. The first module is local markets. There's a second module called transaction tools. The third module is Americas. The fourth module is Asia and the Pacific. And the final module is Europe and the Middle East. So there's a focus on every part of the world on a different day. And you're going to come out of here learning a lot of stuff. It'll be like drinking from a fire hose, but you get to keep the books and you can use them as reference. And
Right.
to me, it's priceless having my designation.
The majority of the people on the call and within our this intimate global group have their CIPS.
Actually, no. Many are taking the class because they do want the designation. So.
No, I'm saying on this group, on this call
I
today.
think most of you do. I think I had a couple of you guys as one of my students a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and you've taught for ABoR too, so so we've got that going on. So it's all the education is great. We're trying to get it out there as much as we can. So does anybody have any last questions?
I have one question regarding the CIPS. So you talk twice about the separation of the classwork and the designation. So after you do the classwork, what do you have to do to get the designation?
Good point.
Great question. There is a form that you have to fill out. It's called the CIPS application. It's about 6 pages long, and then they ask you a certain amount of questions, and each question has a point value. You have to reach 100 points to be able to submit your application to NAR. And the first 3 questions are usually the one that has the most point value, because you're supposed to document the 3 international transactions. 3 international transactions, and each one is worth 25 points. So if you have had more than 3 international transactions, you can only put 3 down, so you got 75 points. And then you have other questions. Do you speak a foreign language? Have you attended real estate trade shows in another country? Are you a member of another global committee? All of these questions are worth a certain amount of points. When you get to 100, then you can send your application fee to NAR they'll know that you finished all 5 courses. You don't have to show them proof, because the 5 courses that you took and finished will be on your record at NAR. And then, of course, within 2 or 3 weeks, you'll get an email from the CIPS group telling you, congratulations, you're now a CIPS, la, la, la. They'll send you your diploma, your certificate, a pin, and a whole bunch of other stuff via the mail. But I had another question.
Now, Richard, I thought they had removed the production amount on the application.
Not
You
to my
didn't?
knowledge. Not to my
Okay.
knowledge.
All
And
right.
by the way, let me clarify something. An international transaction that this is NAR's definition of an international transaction, is when one of these 4 things happens, or one of these 4 things has to be present in the transaction. Number 1, the buyer comes from another country. Number 2, a party to the transaction, whether it's a buyer or the seller, speaks another language other than English at home. Number 3, the money comes from another country. And of course, number 4 would be when the property is located outside of the US. So anytime that you have done a transaction that has one of those 4 elements, it is considered an international transaction. So most people have already done international transactions and didn't realize it, because they had somebody who spoke Spanish or Chinese or Portuguese or German, And yes, that counts as an international transaction. And you get
Okay.
3 for 25 points each. And then the other 25 points, my gosh, you can do it probably in your sleep. So it's the hardest thing about getting your CIPS is sitting in the classroom for 5 days. I'll tell you that. It's the hardest thing.
So Richard, you said CIPS was the second best designation that NAR offers. In your opinion, what's the first best designation?
GRI.
Yeah.
GRI.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've told people, and I have several of them, I felt like the GRI was really to tell other agents that you know what you're doing and that you've gone through the paperwork a few times.
Yeah.
For me, that's what it was. The CIPS for me was probably really building a line of business around a international referral business.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at your different lines of where your income is coming from, to me, that was the most direct referral building designation you can get based on the level of play within the agents that get that, take the time to get that one. Especially your international people that get the CIPS. I found that the level of professionalism is very high among the CIPS people. You could probably say that about a couple of the other designations as well, but those are kind of the differentiators for me.
Before I forget, if you end up receiving a referral from an AMPI member in Mexico, you are allowed to pay a referral fee. Okay? And we know this because we cleared this with the Trek commissioner several years ago. Wayne Thornburn, who was the commissioner in 2005, he went down to AMPI Congreso, and I met him there in Mexico City, and I asked him point blank, says, are we allowed to pay commissions to the Mexican AMPI guys if we do a referral? And he said, yep, that's perfectly fine with us.
Okay, that's good to know. And the only other thing we didn't really cover is, and I know we're running a tick long here, the HAR has a international listing agreement. How are you guys dealing with that with some of the information that's coming out of NAR? And are you going to continue to have that in place, or what does that look like?
It is there. It's in the HAR website, and I guess anybody can use it. I don't use it because I use the TAR. And when I do an international listing, I just use the TAR promulgated form.
Okay.
I know it's like 9 pages long, but it just covers more stuff. And remember that if you're gonna take a listing for another property outside of the U.S. and you want to put it on your MLS, you have to follow the local MLS rules.
Yeah, that's not allowed in Austin.
Which typically would mean that there has to be an exclusive rights to sell, and you got to have a whole bunch of other information. Yeah. So,
yeah. Okay.
But yeah,
that's still a sticky wicket for us right now. So we're working through what our process is going to be here, and I don't know if we'll have a definition anytime soon. So, Richard, I want to thank you so much for your time. This has been great. I know I've had a few people have to pop off because they're off showing or jumping onto some other meetings. So greatly appreciate your time, insights. I will look for an email from you with a couple of that information. I will send an email out to all of our global ambassadors here and make sure that they have your information so they can reach out personally.
You guys want to reach me, I'm available anytime. Just shoot me an email or text me and I'll try to answer your questions.
Great. Thanks so much, guys. Take care.
Thank you guys for spending an hour with me. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
See you guys. Take care.